When you live in someone else's country, you are a guest. You do not get to decide which of their rules are beneath you. Each country runs the way it runs, and the permit and the inspection and the rules, the paperwork, they're the price of being allowed to build there. Malaysian state goes looking for the future, keeps handing its money and its land to people who are just passing through. And the ones who actually stayed, who put down roots and built something here, are the ones it keeps overlooking. If you only look at eFishery and FashionValet, you will think the problem is a couple of bad checks. It is not. The problem is the machine that keeps writing them. In the last few weeks, 3 different Malaysia stories have hit the news. And on the surface, they have nothing to do with each other. A government pension fund talked about losing nearly 200 million ringgit in a fish farming startup that turned out to be a big fraud. A celebrity founder and her husband sat in a courtroom over money that came from 2 of the biggest state funds. And a quasi-crypto commune full of foreigners in Forest City had its license pulled by the local council and announced that they would be exiting. A fraud, a trial, and a controversy. 3 different casts, 3 different genres. And I want to spend this episode talking about how they're kind of the same story. Because underneath all 3 is one uncomfortable pattern about how Malaysia spends its public money and who actually ends up on the receiving end of it. And once you see the pattern, you can't really unsee it. Here it is, in one line, and then I will spend the next 20 or so minutes proving it. When the Malaysian state goes looking for the future, keeps handing its money and its land to people who are just passing through. And the ones who actually stayed, who put down roots and built something here, are the ones it keeps overlooking. Hold on to that second half, because that is where we're going to end. I'm Kevin Brocklin. This is Sea of Startups, real, raw, relatable. Now let's get into it. I want to start off with a story that is not really new to the news. It's come back into the news because of defending it. So we'll start with the pension fund, because this is the one that should make you angriest, and not for the reason you think. The fund is KWAP. It manages the retirement savings of Malaysian civil servants, teachers, nurses, clerks, the people who keep the country running, essentially. About 195 last year, it earned more than 8 billion ringgit in investment income. This is a serious professional institution. Now, in July 2023, KWAP put nearly 200 million ringgit, which is about 47 million US dollar, give or take, into an Indonesian startup called eFishery, a company that made internet-connected fish feeders and sold itself as the future of aquaculture in Southeast Asia. It was the darling of the startup ecosystem. Now, you already know how this ends because I told you in the open, and it's been plastered all over the news for some time. eFishery was a fraud, one of the biggest startup frauds this region has ever produced. The founder was sentenced to 9 years in an Indonesian prison. Sounds like that just got reduced after appeal, down to 6, from my understanding, because the company had been keeping 2 sets of books. It claimed to have deployed around 400,000 of these smart feeders in the field. The real number was about 24,000. 400,000 claimed, 24,000 real. They inflated the fleet by more than 15 times, and they inflated the revenue to match. And for a long time, nobody caught it. Now, here is where I need you to pay a little bit of attention, because the easy story, I think, is the wrong story. And the easy story is just to say that the investors were lazy or reckless, or that somebody was asleep at the wheel. And why this is back on the news is because the Prime Minister stood in front of the Dewan Negara this week to essentially answer for it and talk about how they were defrauded intentionally by a founder. And when the Anti-Corruption Commission opened its probe, that is the story that a lot of people weren't expecting to come out of it, that somebody was careless with the money. But that is not what happened, I don't think. And the truth, in my view, what I see as the truth, is far more useful. Because KWAP, along with the others, did not skip the due diligence per se. KWAP was part of a consortium that spent a lot on diligence. SoftBank was in this deal, Temasek was in this deal. Serious money with serious teams. Between them, the investors hired, and I'm not exaggerating, they hired 4 separate audit and diligence firms. You had PwC, you had Grant Thornton, EY was in there, KPMG was in there. They hired 6 more firms just to survey the market and validate eFishery's position in it. They hired Kroll, the corporate investigations outfit, to do background checks on the founders. They were doing due diligence. That is not necessarily carelessness. That's millions of dollars of the reputable professional diligence firms that money can buy. So every single one of them missed it. The biggest names, expensive due diligence, and they missed it. Do you want to know why? Because all of that diligence was done on paper. They verified the financial statements. They cross-checked the documents. They interviewed the management. They confirmed the numbers in the data room matched the numbers in the other data room. Audits, reporting. But I don't believe that one of them got in a car and drove out to the fish farms to actually count the feeders. If a single one of those firms or a single one of those investors or due diligence firms, one of them had spent 1 week doing what any private equity analyst is trained to do on day one, go to the site, walk the floor, talk to the actual customers. They would have found 24,000 machines where the company had promised 400,000. The fraud was not hiding in the accounts. It was hiding in plain sight, in the fields, where it doesn't seem like anybody actually bothered to look. Now, this is the part I want every founder and every fund manager listening to burn into their memory. Diligence on documents only tells you the documents are consistent. It does not tell you the documents are true. The cheapest, most boring check in the entire toolkit, physically going and looking at the thing, is the one that nobody did. Now, let me be fair to these investors and KWAP specifically, since I'm highlighting them, on one thing, and maybe I'll be a little bit fair part. The money itself, 200 million ringgit against a fund of 100 and the rounding error. It's 1/10 of 1%. Nobody's pension is at risk. When you hear political noise talking about it, keep it in proportion. This is not a hole in the fund. It's slightly embarrassing, but it's not an emergency. The hard part, however, it is exactly because the money was small that perhaps the failure matters. This was not a bet that was a bet that was never really examined, waved through on the strength of who else was in the round. SoftBank's in, Temasek's in, the auditor signed off, the diligence firms that we're paying signed off, so we're in. That may work in the public markets, but that's not private investing. That is following. And when a pension fund follows a crowd, foreign funds, into a foreign fraud, you have to ask the question that this whole episode is about. Would any of that have to do with building Malaysia? Now, hold that question. We are going to keep asking it. And that's part of the through line that I want to. You started a company to build a product, not to run a back office. But here you are. You pay an accounting firm every month, and once a year, you get a clean set of accounts. That is compliance. It's not clarity. It will not tell you if you run out of cash in March. It will not tell you what one new hire does to your runway. And it will not answer the question every investor asks: where's this business heading? So I built your CFO, your back office in a box. Your books keeps your accounting books current, and your CFO puts your forecast forward. In one login, your actuals flowing straight into your Outlook. Link your strategic initiatives, like a hire or a price change, to exactly what it does to your runway before you commit. Investor ready, operationally ready, in the currency that you work in. It is the back office I run across my own companies. Get your finances settled for your business today at yourcfo.tech. That's yourcfo.tech. Now, second one, to the courtroom. And I'm going to be careful here because this is a live trial. The founders have pleaded not guilty, and I'm not here to convict anyone from a microphone. So everything I say about the alleged conduct is exactly that, alleged. The courts will decide in due process. But the investment itself, the money going in and the money coming out, is a matter of public record, stated, reported upon, and that part I can talk about. The company is FashionValet, Malaysian fashion e-commerce startup founded by Vivi Yusuf and her husband. Vivi was and is one of the most recognizable entrepreneurs in the country, a genuine influencer before that word got cheap. Built a following, built a modest wear brand called Dot that people genuinely loved and became the face of a certain kind of Malaysian success story. In 2018, two of the largest state funds invested. Kazana put in 27 million ringgit, PNB put in 20 million ringgit, so call it 47 million of public money went into a homegrown fashion brand. On the surface, okay. Here's the number that should actually stop you and give you pause. When they both eventually sold their stakes, they got back a combined 3.1 million ringgit on a 47 million ringgit investment. A loss of basically 44, which was confirmed by startups lose money, understandable. But here's the thing that should start making you consider a little bit more. It was available before they ever actually wrote a check. It was a money-losing operation every single year that they were operating. And the losses grew from a couple 100,000 to more than 10 million ringgit a year. 6 straight years of ready. Now, startups lose money. The point of many of them is that you raise, you burn it for additional growth. But you have to have a guess. Those funds looked at the 6 years of losses and still decided to invest that 47 million. So the obvious question is, why? Now, I wasn't there, wasn't involved in it. And it's around the time that I first showed up in Malaysia. So I definitely wasn't savvy enough in order to understand everything that was going on at that point in time. But I don't think that the honest answer has anything to do with, I think the honest answer is worse in a way because it's a pattern rather than an offense. They did not buy a business. I think they bought a face. They bought a narrative. They bought the following, the brand, the magazine covers, the idea that if you back the most famous young founder in the country, some of that shine rubs off on you. And you get to say the National Wealth Fund is backing national icons. It can feel modern. It can tick mark the boxes that you need for your marketing, for your PR. It felt like the future and it photographed well. But an icon is not a business model. A following is not a balance sheet. And when the thing you actually bought is a personality, you bought a fragile asset, because the moment public sentiment turns, and in the influencer game, it always eventually can turn, your investment turns with it. And here is the detail that tells you this is a real lesson and not just me attempting to be clever. Kazana itself, after this blew up, publicly warned about the risk of what it called icon-driven businesses. The fund basically said the quiet part out loud. It admitted that betting on personality is a structural mistake. But to be fair, every investor makes mistakes. Do they learn and move on from it? So here they tell you exactly what went wrong. They bought the face, not the business. Now, put those two stories side by side because they do rhyme, in my view. In eFishery, they bought a foreign founder's story and never really checked the fields. In FashionValet, they bought a local founder's story and never respected the profit and loss statement. One was fraud, one was just a bad business, and I want to be clear, those are very different things. But the investor's mistakes underneath both is fairly similar. They funded the narrative, and they skipped the boring verification that would have told them the narrative was hollow. And in both cases, the public money went in on the strength of a name, not a capability it gets to keep. A name, a narrative. Which brings me to the part of this episode I actually care about more, because two bad deals is just two bad deals. What I want to show you now is that this is not two bad deals. This is the machine working exactly as it has always worked. So let's zoom out from the individual scandals, because if you only look at eFishery and FashionValet, you will think the problem is a couple of bad checks. It is not. The problem is the machine that keeps writing them. For more than 20 years, the government has been trying to build a venture capital scene by pouring public money into funds and programs that invest and support startups. And I want to walk you through a little bit of the track record because it is genuinely something to behold. So if you go back and you start with MAVCAP, the government's venture arm that goes back to the early 2000s, over the years, over R500,000,000 has poured out into various fund managers. And by last reporting, the amount that had come back was somewhere around 200 plus. Now, to translate that, for every R1 the government committed through that entity, about 38 cents found its way home. Now, we do need to keep in mind liquidity issues, etc., but that is a very slow, very official way of setting money on fire. And in the context, the startup ecosystem didn't all of a sudden become massively robust after the fact. So then came the next attempt in 2020, Pinjana, a fund of hundreds of millions of dollars designed to kickstart the sector after the pandemic. Big launch, big numbers. But what happened? Years later, very little of the money actually had been deployed. It slowed to a trickle, did not end up working out. The government, the local investors, and the foreign partners, they all wanted different things, and the whole apparatus essentially seized up. So that is attempt number 2. And so what then happens after 2 stalls? It does not stop. It rebrands. They consolidate those prior attempts under the sovereign fund in late 2024, launched a brand new version of it, new name, new commitment of capital, part of an even bigger government mobilization effort. Fresh name, fresh logo, fresh press release, fresh faces. Now, do you see it yet? Because MAVCAT, then Bajana, then the new entity, 3 names, 1 machine, more than 2 decades, and the headline result along the way isn't really seeming to work. Do want to be careful and fair, because this is where the honesty of the show does end up mattering, because some good inevitably still comes out of programs, even if on aggregate they haven't fully lived up to the potential they were supposed to. Real managers got their first checks from the vehicles. Some very good local companies have been back, and hopefully the new iteration, it's too early to see any results, but hopefully it can end up doing better than the predecessors. I'm not telling you every single ringgit was wasted, and I'm not telling you that any of the people are bad or otherwise. Many smart and sincere people. But what I am saying is that the machine, as a machine, has not built the thing it was supposed to build. After 20 plus years, 3 names, there's still not a self-sustaining venture scene. It has a state that keeps starting one or trying to encourage one, but it just hasn't materialized in the way that it ought to have. And now watch what happens when you connect the machine to scandals. Because some of this public money, including from KWAP, has gone into foreign accelerators operating in Malaysia. Take Antler, for example. Global platform, headquartered in Singapore. The pension fund is one of its backers. Antler in Malaysia has written over about a year and a half, something like $2 million US across 19 tiny checks in companies, minus program fees, which means the number is actually like 40% less. But meanwhile, at the global level, they reshuffled the whole strategy, folding in countries. And now, if you're in Malaysia, you can't even have a local program. Now, I'm not saying that they did anything wrong. I do want to be clear on that, because I don't want the internet to all of a sudden think that there's a contrary story here. They're doing what a global program does. It runs a playbook, it deploys small, it optimizes for its own portfolio. And, Malaysia is just one line in a very large spreadsheet, and there was an opportunity in order to. And that is the point. That is the whole point. The local sovereign fund, it has a tendency of flowing to players for whom Malaysia is just a line item. A foreign startup that sends the growth to Indonesia, a foreign accelerator that answers to a global strategy, a fund of fund that returns pennies on the dollar and gets a new name. At no in this chain, is there anyone whose actual job, whose actual mission is to build something durable in Malaysia and actually stay to see it through? So the money shows up, the photo gets taken, and then everyone moves on. And the country and the ecosystem is left holding the losses and waiting to start the next program. Now, I don't believe that Malaysia it has thrown capital at this for 2 decades. There's a problem of alignment. Malaysia keeps giving the money to people who are, in the most literal sense, just passing through. And the flip side, and the part that should really sting, is that we barely lift a finger for the ones who stay or who are building roots. Hold that. We're going to end right there. We're going to end that point right there. So let me switch a little bit, because we'll come back. And this does bring me to, finally, to the Forest City controversy. The crypto commune, because I think this is a fairly clear version of the whole pattern, and it just ended in the most telling way possible as well. So Network School is founded by Balaji Srinivasan, a former Coinbase executive, and a kind of the idea of a network state, the notion that you can build a new society out of people who share beliefs online rather than a shared piece of land. He set up a real-world version in Forest City, in Johor, around 400 residents, something like that, from more than 70 countries, paying $1,500 a month to live there, code together, and talk about digital sovereignty. Now, I want to start with the smallest detail because it tells you almost everything about this particular situation. From the very beginning, they did not call it Malaysia. When they did the announcement, he called it, and I'm quoting, Singapore. That is how they sold it over and over. An island near Singapore. You wouldn't see any of their public statements say Johor, not Malaysia. The country they were actually living in barely got a mention. They borrowed the neighbor's reputation and left out the landlord's name. Now, sit with that for a second, because obviously that is incredibly frustrating for anyone that has any vested interest or adoration or enjoyment of being part of this country. And it's not a small thing. If you will not even say the name of the country you have chosen to live in, if you would rather be near Singapore than in Malaysia, and you've already told everyone exactly how deep your roots go, right? Malaysia was never the home. It was the address on the invoice. Then come to more recently the controversy. There were viral accusations swirling around all that, or talk about the accusations or otherwise. But when immigration actually inspected, they followed exactly what they should do. There were accusations. There is a duty from government to their own populace to ensure that the rules and regulations and laws are being followed. Now, let me say the principle out loud, because it matters far more than whatever the specific accusations were. Every government on earth, when a public accusation like that lands on its doorstep, is obligated to look into it. That is not persecution. That is a government doing the one job. And here is the part every foreigner, myself included, needs to hear plainly. When you live in someone else's country, you are a guest. You do not get to decide which of their rules are beneath you. Each country runs the way it runs, and the permit and the inspection and the rules, the paperwork, they're the price of being allowed to build there. Now, I get the frustration. I genuinely do. I am a foreigner in this region myself, a founder and an investor, and I know exactly how it feels when the rules may be slow or imbalanced and the forms make no sense and someone is holding up a thing that should take 5 minutes. That friction is real and it can be maddening. But the response to the whole response here was an ultimatum. Threatened to get a shutdown order, and then all of a sudden we're seeing that there's a signed deal in Mr. Expedited visas, etc., while the dust is still settling. I mean, from my perspective, what is that? What does that actually tell you? If your answer to one situation is threaten the country and have a replacement ready by dinner, then you were never really here in the first place. You were parked. And I don't think that the next destination is necessarily a new home. It's just the next island near somewhere. And I will say this too, as someone who has to make these calls myself, the ultimatum was a bad tactic, even on its own terms. You do not win a dispute like this, and you're not going to get special sovereign treatment by publicly threatening to walk out and cause reputational harm and damage. You win it by fixing You win it by working with and trying to not just extract value, but to deliver value. Leading with the threat did not show strength. It showed that the exit was already the plan. So, now let me be fair as well, I guess, because I always try to be. Was there some benefit to Malaysia while they were here? Maybe, but not really directly, to be perfectly honest with you. Sure, a lot of sharp, ambitious people came into one place. Some knowledge probably rubbed off on the small fraction who were local. Did they ever venture out into the general community? Did they ever end up doing any sort of knowledge transfer to the remainder? Could it have actually ended up being positive, a positive indication that could create a magnet for more people to come and view and say, well, if they're there, maybe I should check out the rest? Sure. But I'm not going to pretend that those are worth nothing, but I do not believe for one second that any of that was ever the actual intention. Knowledge transfer to Malaysians does not seem to have been the mission. Building a magnet for people who would put down roots does not seem to have been the mission. The mission, it seems, was a cheap base with a nice view of Singapore and rules light enough to ignore. They were trying to use Malaysia as a backdrop, not the problem. The instant the backdrop asked them to comply with the rules, they went and found a new backdrop. And that, finally, is the through line that I actually do want to leave you with, because it is so much bigger than a single crypto commune. Malaysia has a long, expensive habit of rolling out the carpet for the passerby, the person who comes to extract, not to build something that stays. The fund that flies in, deploys, and flies out. The foreign accelerator that gets lured in with public money and quietly folds its tent when the theme changes. The new brand that shows up, puts a bunch of juniors and treats it like a back office. The brand name that gets the ministerial welcome and the photo op. We put into luring a resume, into importing a logo, into whoever looks impressive on the way in. And meanwhile, the people who actually stayed get almost none of it. I will say this as a foreigner who did stay. There are people in this country who were not born here, who came and who put down real roots, who built companies here, who hired locals and mentored founders and invested in founders and made the boring, unglamorous 10-year bet on this place with no exit lined up in their back pocket. Those people do not get a memorandum signed within hours. They do not get the minister at the airport. They get to queue up and fill in the same forms as everyone else and wait. That is upside down, I think. There is dramatically more support in this system to lure a brand name than to back the ones who have been loyal, who have tried to build roots and grow something around them. And you do not build anybody by courting the people most ready to leave. You build it by backing the ones who already decided to stay. So here is where it lands. Right now, as I speak, the public institutions are putting hundreds and hundreds of million more into the semiconductor sector. And that could be the best decision they make this decade, or it could be the same iteration with a new logo. The difference will not be the size of the check. It'll be whether this time the money flows to the people who are staying and not the ones who are already halfway to the next island. The ones that are building and creating value that will stay instead of extracting and extracting. That is the show. It annoyed some of you, I'm sure, and it should have. If you run one of these funds, or if you are someone who quietly built something real here and watched the welcome party go to a brand name instead, my inbox is open. Come and show me what you built. This has been Sea of Startups. Real, raw, relatable, We'll see you next week.
And that does it for this episode of Sea of Startups. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to, please give it a like, give it a review, subscribe to our channel. A little bit of feedback goes a long way in allowing us to keep on putting out these kind of episodes.